Okay, hello everyone. My name is Amy Salazar. I'm an assistant professor at Washington State University in Vancouver, and I'm part of the leadership team for the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni in Higher Education. Thanks for being here with us today. For our next webinar today in our webinar series. First, I'd like to just let everyone know we are recording today's webinar and we'll be posting it on the NRC FAHE website. So I'd like to ask participants, not presenters, but participants, to please keep your cameras off so you don't become part of the part of the recording. And you are free to use the chat box at any time during the webinar today. If you have questions, we'll keep an eye on those and we'll answer those at the end of the webinar. So just wanted to note that we will be having a little bit about our next webinar before we get started with today's. So our September webinar will be held Thursday, September 23rd from noon to 1 Pacific, 3 to 4 Eastern. And the presenter will be Dr. Regina Gavin-Williams. She's at North Carolina Central University School of Education. And her presentation is entitled Students That Are Reaching Success, or STARS, a college and career readiness program for adolescents in foster care. And she'll be talking about her 10-week college and career readiness intervention for youth aging out of care. So if you're not already, you can register for that webinar. There's a link on the NRC FAHE website. You can see the link on the slide here on the screen. Or if you're having any trouble finding that link, you can send me an email at amy.salazar, amy.salazar@wsu.edu. So, another thing I'd like to note is if any of you would like to turn on the closed captioning, there's a link on that on your menu. I believe it's under the live transcript button. So you can check out some options for that there as well. So what we'll be doing today is we have 3 presenters today that I'll introduce in just a moment, and they'll be presenting for about 35-40 minutes. And then after that, we'll open up for some Q&A time. As I said, as we go, feel free to type in questions that come up for you, and I will read those out to our presenters at the end. Okay, so for today's webinar is entitled Expanding Promise, Depicting the Ecosystems of Support and Financial Sustainability for Students in or Aged Out of Foster Care. And we're lucky and very fortunate to have 3 presenters today. There's Dr. Angelique Day, who's at the University of Washington School of Social Work, Dr. Sebrena Jackson at the University of Alabama, and Dr. Lauren Ford at the San Mateo County Community College District. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I'll hand it over to our presenters.
All right, can you see the screen okay? Perfect, I see some head nods. Thank you all so much for having us today. My name is Lauren Ford. I am at the San Mateo County Community College District, where I serve as the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Research. I'm really excited to be here with this amazing team of individuals to share a bit of the research and the paper that we wrote regarding Promise programs and how you might better be able to serve students aged in and out of foster care. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves and then we can start our presentation.
Thanks, Lauren, and welcome to everyone again. I'm Sebrena Jackson and just delighted to be here. Love this conversation and appreciate the opportunity from the NRC group. As Amy's already shared, I'm at the University of Alabama and I'm doing this work in the state of Alabama.
Sorry, forgot to unmute. So I promise I will stop talking just to myself. My name is Angelique Day. I'm an associate professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Washington. And Lauren, Sebrena, and I are part of a larger design team. So I just want to give out some shout out credits to Angelique Salazar and Catherine Lester, who were a part of this process that we're going to enlighten you all about today. I'm super excited about this partnership. It's a perfect example of how magical it can be when you bring education leaders, social work leaders, and those with lived experience together to create something beautiful. So we're excited to share our lessons learned today and also let you all know about next steps.
Perfect. Thank you, Angelique. That's a perfect kind of segue into giving some background information about what brought us all here and brought us together. So in 2015, the U.S. Department of Education kind of launched this call to action to increase college degree and certificates attainment by 50% within the U.S. And that was where the America's College Promise initiative was really born. It then kind of transferred into its own separate organization that's a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit initiative that's focused on building public support for funding for the first 2 years of post-secondary education for individuals within the country. And so there's a strong emphasis when you think about free college and this free college initiative. These are the folks that are really behind it and are doing a lot of work both at the state level, at the national level, at the institutional level to help practitioners and policymakers really think about how they might be able to provide a debt-free free college experience for folks within our communities around the country. And so just to give a little bit of insight, back in 2015, when it kind of really started, there were 53 programs. There are now 368 programs, individual programs that are within this kind of college promise movement. And it includes 30 statewide programs. So the ones that you see in blue, the states on the map in blue include the statewide kind of promise for students to help support their college attendance. And that includes Washington, D.C. as well. And so over the past 6 years, there has really been a lot of work and due diligence done in order to promote the idea of free higher education and post-secondary education. As a result, in 2019, College Promise, the organization, partnered with ETS, the Policy Evaluation and Research Center, in order to really dive into identifying what it would take to support different groups of students and their college populations within this College Promise movement, because we knew that there were students that had some unique identities, barriers perhaps, and access to various resources, both financially, culturally, capital-wise, that would be really important to understand how to create these programs to support the students. And so with the notion of being able to better understand what type of wraparound supports and services were needed for students to thrive within college, to unpack the different challenges and that impact diverse student populations, and to really provide some practical recommendations for practitioners, policymakers, and funders, again, to best support students from diverse backgrounds. And so in 2019, the focus, they chose 5 different kind of groups of students to really focus on. And so they started with the traditional age students, adult students, dreamers, student veterans, and students that were incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. There was a launch of papers that came as a result of that. And they said, but that's not it. Who else do we really need to be focusing on? And so then in 2021, actually last year in 2020, they reached out to a number of individuals around the country in order to then focus on 5 more populations, including first-generation students, students in or aged out of foster care, students with disabilities, student parents, and students needing academic support. And so that's where we came in. The College Promise and ETS folks reached out to our group here, along with a few others that Angelique mentioned, Angelique Salazan and Catherine Lester, in order to kind of put our heads together, unpack what the research says, identify what we know to be true based on either lived experiences or experiences kind of supporting students within higher education within these realms, and also identifying what the research hasn't said before, but we know is a huge need. And that's really how we came up with the paper that we're essentially presenting in front of you all today. And so I wanted to provide a little background as to how we all came together. And towards the end, I'll also share kind of some next steps of where you might be able to find that paper and what other additional conversations might be had with the College Promise and ETS group to really think about how we best support our students that we know are on our campuses that may not be able to currently receive the full breadth of supports that we know would be helpful to support them in their thriving on campus. And so I will now turn it over to Sebrena to talk a little bit about our student population that we're focusing on. Again, that's our students that are in or aged out of foster care. And then we'll talk a little bit about recommendations, what financial implications may look like, and then finally, some next steps regarding College Promise. Sebrena?
Thanks so much, Lauren. So just to, as Lauren has already shared, she gave the broad context. So to think about this population that we're all working with and interested in, we recognize that there are over 400,000 foster youth nationwide, and nearly 20,000 of those are in this age 18 to 21. And I'll share too, as I share a little bit about, well, let me share the stats and then I'll say something about the stats as well. Roughly 80% of those youth aspire to enroll in college based upon the literature and research. Slightly over 50% actually graduate from high school, and roughly 20% enroll in college, and depending on the research or the study, 3 to 12% graduate from college with a bachelor's degree. And one of the things that we learned as we were working on this paper and brought in stakeholders from different groups around the country, one of the things that we realized is as we talk about these statistics, and these are stats that all of us use in our papers and other places, we realize that we really need more work done to really assess where we are as it relates to this population and college enrollment. And we know the stats vary depending on the state, depending on the initiative that happens, but this is what we have right now in terms of national statistics that we use for the paper. But wanted to make note that we realize that more work needs to be done to gather more data. We recognize that this population also faces multiple barriers to college access and retention, and those barriers could be mental health challenges, they could be financial difficulties, needing to work, housing, transportation, just a number of barriers, even lacking supportive adults to help them to navigate the process of enrolling into college and even being successful once they get to college. But we also want to note that although this population faces multiple barriers, they also have multiple strengths. And we're wanting to see and need to see more studies that focus on those strengths and that highlight those strengths. And one of the studies that I've been working with and fortunate to work with Dr. Tony Nacarado on is we've been doing a qualitative study interviewing former youth who are graduates of college, who have post-secondary education, who have graduate degrees. And so we're looking forward to contributing to the literature. And I think we've had some conversations even with this group about that work in terms of the strengths that this population brings to the table. Next slide. So as we think about what are some of the current programs and practice that we're seeing around the country as it relates to college access for foster youth in or aged out of care, we kind of look at several categories. And the first is targeted at pre-college or college access programs. And we found that these programs, of course, are less established than some of our college retention programs, but they were worth noting in the paper. We highlighted a program that we have here in the state of Alabama, the National Social Work Enrichment Program, INSEP, that I have done quite a bit of work with. We also thought about and talked about the FAME program that was at Michigan State, and Better Futures Project out of Oregon. And Amy Salazar is also doing a lot of research and work in terms of college access programs, and even her work goes into the retention aspect as well. When we think about the campus-based and retention support programs, I believe Lauren's going to talk a little bit or give a couple of examples of that, but we're fortunate that we're seeing now more and more campuses are recognizing the need to support this population on their campuses. And so there are initiatives all over the country, from California to Alabama to Texas to Michigan and others, Florida and other states, that have campus-based support programs, but there are also national and state coordinating groups. Of course, this national research group that is made up of researchers and practitioners and now educators as well. There's also the FAN group, the Fostering Academic Access or Fostering Academic Achievement. I had to make a note to make sure I got that second A, but Fostering Academic Achievement Nationwide Network or FAN network that Matty Day helped to launch. And that group is very active, and it's made up of higher education educators. It's also made up of coordinators of programs from around the country. And so there's some national and statewide coordinating groups really coming together to think about what needs to happen to support this population. And of course, child welfare agencies are also trying to do their part to support this group. Just one example we talk about in the paper is Casey's LEAP program, and they pull together multi-sites or different groups to come together to support youth who are experiencing challenges trying to complete their degrees. And there are federal funding initiatives like Pell and ETV, and states also have tuition waivers or other kinds of scholarship programs that they're doing to support youth that are in care. And so there are a lot of current programs and current practices, how we figure out how to bring those groups together so that we're talking and we're sharing information and sharing resources, and thinking about if we created an ecosystem for this population on college campuses, what would that look like based upon what we know that we currently have in programs and practice, and where we need to go with it. And so next up, Angelique is going to talk, I believe, about some of the funding aspects of these programs and the funding that's available, and policy, broader policy that is currently implemented for this population, but also in the future, what we need to have.
My apologies. So we're going to go into the funding portion. We're also going to talk a little bit about recommendations in a moment. And so there are a variety of different funding streams that institutions, that organizations really kind of lean upon in order to ensure that they can support students that are foster care alumni. And so we wanted to just at least kind of mention all of the variety of different spaces of funding that might be tapped into. Historically, institutions and agencies had to be really strategic about the use of the braided funds that they had access to in order to support the academic, social, and emotional and personal needs of foster care alumni. But in the following slides, we'll share a little bit more information about federal funding opportunities that really impact the access and support for foster care alumni. So Angelique.
Yep. And before I really go into detail here on the federal pieces, what I'm hoping one of the takeaways of today's presentation will be is for you all to think creatively about how you can braid funding streams that are available in your communities, defining that as both federal, state, local resources, university-based resources, community-based resources. So there's a plethora of opportunity, but it takes some creativity and some magic among all of us to be able to integrate those pieces together so that we can build the best infrastructure possible for our college-going young people. All right, so I know I had some veterans on the call today who are familiar with some of this, but some of this will be new to others that are on the call. So I'm going to do just some basic definitions of the federal resources, as well as going into some more recent opportunities, and we'll also discuss some things that are being discussed actually right now in Congress that can be used to support our young people. But we'll certainly take and invite all of you to be actively engaged in those conversations to maximize the opportunities that are before us. Okay, so for many of you know, the oldest and program that we have to support college going among foster youth is the Chafee Foster Care Independence Program of 2001. So it's really the first opportunity that the feds acknowledge the unique challenges that young people who are in care honor after the age of 14 experience in their transition from the foster care system to independent living. This particular program was recently expanded under the Family First Prevention Services Act, which was wonderful, and it aligns nicely with much of the research that many of our NRC members have that promoted research to support the need to expand the age of eligibility. As all of you know, when Chafee first began implemented, it was really limited to young people who were in foster care on or after their 14th birthday, and was only available to use up until their 21st birthday. So we're excited that due to the Consolidated Appropriations Act that passed in 2021, we also have been able to extend not only up to age 23, but one of the provisions within Chafee, the education training voucher, up to age 26. This particular provision temporarily expands the ETV, unfortunately is not permanent yet. Through the provision of an additional $50 million and eliminates the state match requirement. This is a big deal in terms of being able to implement this program in states nationwide. And that because of match requirements, not all of our states have fully embraced the foster care extension or Chafee extension opportunity. So by eliminating the state match requirement, it really expands opportunities for states to fully embrace the intent of that particular law. This extension runs from the period of April 2020 through September 2022. So I'm encouraging all of you to get to know your state policy on how they're rolling out this expanded resources. There's a lot to learn from states who have been early adopters, especially among states who've been a little bit more cautious in terms of fully expanding this opportunity in their communities. This additional allocation also increases the maximum benefit award for an education training voucher from $5,000 per young person to $12,000 per young person. So it's a huge chunk of dollars for the young people living in our community. And then again, it extends the eligibility criteria from the award from age 26, which passed in the 2018 legislation, up to age 27 for this period up to through September 30th of 2022. There also has been some discussion through the federal advocacy community about supporting the idea of making this eligibility criteria in the ETV permanent. Obviously, we don't have concrete legislation introduced on that yet, but there is discussion, and I invite all of you on the call, if you're interested, to become engaged in those communications should you have an interest. Okay, so the commitment on this call is to help you understand what child welfare is doing, as well as what our education colleagues are doing to support college going among foster youth. So the first part of the slide, which I just finished discussing, is what the child welfare field has really stepped up to support. But I also want to acknowledge the work that has really been led by our education colleagues. Specifically higher education authority policies that have maximized funding opportunity for college going foster youth with the big groundbreaking policy that passed in 2009, the College Cost Reduction Act, which allows foster care youth who have been in care on or after their 13th birthday to claim independent status on their FAFSA applications. Seems like a small policy change, but it has had huge positive repercussions for foster youth across the country in terms of making it easier to enroll in college and be able to get the resources needed to support finances related to college going. And then, of course, we all know that Pell Grants have been the longest standing grant opportunity for many low-income first-generation college students, of which include foster care youth in terms of paying for college. We've seen recently an increase in the maximum award for Pell Grants. So in the 2021-2022 academic year, students can benefit at a rate of $6,495. And the lifetime limit for Pell Grants is 12 full-time enrolled semesters or 6 academic years. Now, we know that there are some implications for college going foster youth that I'll talk about related to Pell Grants and some opportunities for you all to engage in federal discussions around how do we maximize Pell Grant use among our specific subpopulation of students. I also want to acknowledge state tuition waivers. We have, and it's been very, very exciting that each year there seems to be new states exploring this, passing state tuition waivers in their states. The University of Washington is actually maintaining a website that describes the state tuition waivers, what the eligibility criteria is, how much those awards are by state, and who you can contact to learn about the state tuition waivers in your specific states. Many of these tuition waivers are last dollar awards, meaning that they are applied after these other programs are applied first, including the child welfare dollars and the HEA policies I've highlighted on this slide. Next slide. So additionally, in order to properly support the expansion of promise programs, and Lauren articulated that beautifully earlier in this presentation, that budget allocations are really needed to support our campus support programs. And we have many people on this call today who either run campus support programs, evaluate campus support programs, or maybe you're interested in bringing this to your institution. And for those that are running them, you know, certainly one of the day-to-day stressors that we all experience is how do we keep our programs going long-term? So what we're hoping to describe for you today is to help understand the landscape for being able to fund and maintain these programs long-term. Certainly the use of established institutional funds are really helpful to develop and sustain campus programs that have dedicated staff and space. And we know from research that having dedicated space and dedicated staff is critical to the success of these programs. We know that's a best practice. Additionally, it's important that our programs use both federal and state dollars that are specific to supporting foster youth that were identified on the previous slide, in addition to utilizing state equity dollars that also call out a need to better support disproportionality is necessary. And again, some of you may be engaged in those conversations at the federal level, and there's plenty of opportunity to be engaged in conversations around disproportionality and promoting equity, including equity for college going among our foster care youth. And we've referenced some of these programs already, so I won't go into them. I know Sebrena had talked about the NEKC LEAP program already. Some of the other existing infrastructures that have been designed to support the implementation of campus support programs that many of you may or not already be connected to on your college campuses are the TRIO and Guided Pathways programs that are funded through education dollars rather than child welfare dollars. And those are paid for through federal resources. Now, TRIO is an important one I want to call out because there's federal resources for both college access and college retention embedded in TRIO, and I think that's a program that many of us could do a better job connecting to and braiding that into what we're doing in our campus support programs. Okay. Oops, sorry. Let's go back. Sorry. Okay. So there's also an opportunity for additional funding through collaborations with child welfare agencies and our community-based organizations through in-kind service or service sharing agreements. Again, many of us don't have these formalized, but many of us can speak to examples of how we've done these in our programs. So again, just to call out for us to be more conscientious of this opportunity to braid these funding sources into our programs. Programs such as independent living can provide access to housing and public benefits, while colleges naturally have infrastructure to provide academic supports, healthcare, and food services. And programs such as LEAP through the Annie Casey Foundation can provide access to financial planning and job supports that many of us would be well served to partner and bring to our campuses. Finally, it will be necessary to ensure the intentional integration of supports for foster care alumni, prioritizing their access to programs such as TRIO. One thing I wanted to point out is there is actually federal guidance that really mandates TRIO programs to serve foster care youth, but there's no mandate to actually collect data. So we actually don't know how well that particular mandate has been implemented. So by you all engaging with TRIO, you're actually doing them a favor because they should be explaining how they're serving foster care youth. And so by partnering with campus support programs, that's one easy way for them to explain how they're making that connection. So you would not be a burden. Think of it as you're doing them a favor. All right. All right, next slide. All right. So I'm going to spend the last of my talk today talking about recommendations for improving financing, what the current conversations are going on federally in terms of improving access to college going for foster care youth, and how this connects to the Biden agenda as he's focusing on young Americans in the White House. There is an acknowledgement of the need to braid federal funding streams. This includes child welfare dollars, education dollars, which we've talked about, but I also want to add healthcare dollars to that list. Specifically, most college campuses have campus-based health clinics and counseling centers that are already operational and running. One of the gaps in terms of maximizing these resources is that many of them have not learned how to bill Medicaid, and that we know through the Affordable Care Act that all foster care youth have access to Medicaid until age 26. We are not in a position to maximize that federal law unless we are working with our HEA or higher education located based clinics, specifically campus health and counseling, if they don't accept Medicaid. So this is one opportunity for us to advocate for this to happen. We don't need new federal legislation, it's already there. So it is really just working with them to develop some administrative infrastructure so that they can tap into this resource, which we know is critical to ensuring that our young people have their physical and mental health needs met once they are enrolled at our institutions. Next, in terms of braiding, we have some really clever examples of states who have done a really good job braiding Chafee funds with U.S. Department of Education funds to fund campus-based retention programs. I want to give a shout out to my home state, Michigan, as a great example of a state that uses Chafee funds to actually fund independent living program workers on college campuses. And when you're able to do that, you have an opportunity to have people who understand the child welfare world and how to translate and navigate that world with folks who are experts in higher education and that can work collaboratively, both to maximize those two large systems that our young people are dealing with when they become college enrolled. Now, the advocacy community is calling on a few different things in partnership with the Biden administration and members of Congress that they want to see happen related to improving the college going behavior of foster youth. And again, we're so excited to be partnering with College Promise As many of you know, College Promise was founded under the Obama administration. We have many folks who have returned to the White House through the Biden administration who are passionate about this topic and are excited to expand the College Promise work that originally started under the Obama administration. So we're excited to have the opportunity to be a part of this call, and we're here to recruit all of you to join us in these efforts. And there's a few specific asks that we have. One is to expand the limit on Pell Grant use from 12 semesters to 14 semesters. We know that limits on current policy related to Pell Grants may affect the ability of our students, especially those who stop out or take a break in their college going journeys, which means that it is likely that Pell Grant assistance will end before the completion of their college going journey. This is especially true for youth who fluctuate between stopping out and those who are enrolled part-time. Youth in or aged out of foster care are nearly twice as likely to experience a stop out episode as compared to their non-foster care first-generation low-income peers. While Pell Grants may have a positive effect on student retention, the loss of financial assistance resources have a very large negative effect on students' decisions to continue to pursue a post-secondary education credential. The loss of Pell Grant eligibility status disproportionately impacts foster youth in comparison to other at-risk groups. We now have research that has established that youth in or aged out of foster care graduate at a slower pace with a mean graduation time of 13.5 semesters as compared to low-income first-generation students who graduate at an average of 11 semesters. So you can see current policy, although may be able to meet the needs of the average low-income first-generation student, does not currently meet the needs of foster youth specifically. Okay, we are also pushing for the reintroduction and passage of the Fostering Success in Higher Education Act of 2019. This has bill sponsors, including Congressman Davis and Senator Bob Casey. This particular piece of legislation would actually fund college access and campus-based support programs nationwide. So again, we know that our institutions need resources to be able to successfully support our students. We also know through examples of states who have used federal and state dollars to implement these, that if states are provided about 1/3 the cost, institutions are pretty good about paying for 2/3 of the total cost of implementing these programs. So all in all, it is a big win for us to invest in campus support programs. And I don't think I have to convince anyone on this call that that's an important thing to do. Finally, as many of you have been probably reading daily on the news, is that the infrastructure bill is moving. And there are some really important provisions in the infrastructure bill that directly impact our college-going foster care youth, including increased access to broadband, internet technology, and transportation funding to support students getting to face-to-face classes, and also maximizing participation in virtual classes. We know that different states have different policies related to COVID, but most states are really pushing for face-to-face classrooms in some capacity, as well as having virtual class components. So again, this infrastructure bill includes provisions that support our students regardless of whether they're in face-to-face or virtual classes. So stay tuned. Please don't hit the snooze button when you hear the infrastructure bill being discussed. It impacts you. All right. All right, next slide.
I think we're going to transition over into the recommendations. That was the final slide for the financing piece.
Okay, great.
Okay. And so Angelique talked a bit about what all of the different financial aspects that would really need to either be updated, changed, that are currently in place that could potentially support kind of this ecosystem of support for our foster care alumni in higher education. And so the slide here, I apologize, this is the 6 key areas, but the slide here focuses on what that holistic kind of support would look like, taking into consideration all of the various areas of funding, all of kind of what the literature says and shows that students that are aged in and out of foster care or foster care alumni may potentially need when they're within our institutions. And what we also, again, know to be true that may not be currently within the literature. And so when it comes to being able to provide this holistic support, it really focuses on offering financial support beyond tuition, which is really kind of where College Promise started, was focusing on how do we make this free. But we know that just being free or not having tuition as a burden is not the end all be all and doesn't make a huge difference in moving the needle for overall student success. There needs to be an additional kind of layer and level of support financially, as well as non-financial support for students to truly be successful. So when we think about financial support, it's really thinking about what are all of the other costs or expenditures a student may have in order to be able to be successful and to be able to focus on being a student within higher education. The second is around being able to establish a campus program. And so both Sebrena and Angelique mentioned a few programs in their conversations, whether it's in Alabama or Michigan, programs in Washington, programs in California. And it's great to know that there are opportunities where campus programs are established. So that is not necessarily true across the country or even across the states. I'm in California, I'm based in California, and there is kind of this larger foster youth initiative within the California community colleges, but often that doesn't necessarily result into a program. Instead, that is kind of a person that's the liaison that's supposed to be the go-to for foster youth on campus, in addition to all of the other aspects of their day-to-day job. And so we're really advocating for a place, a space where students can be able to be themselves, to be able to go in and receive support in a space that doesn't necessarily stigmatize their identity as being a foster youth. Being able to provide or receive access to personal or basic needs and support, some of which Angelique was just mentioning, especially as it comes to issues of healthcare. And so being able to utilize on-campus healthcare and psychological services on campus, or even now that we've kind of been able to provide some remote healthcare support, what will that continue to look like? And especially with our students that may have experienced trauma in their lives. So our foster youth, veterans, even being able to reduce any restrictions around time of how many times an individual might be able to access these services in order to really promote the continuity of care for students throughout their time within our institutions. So rethinking the way in which we have traditionally provided services like that to remove any potential barriers for our students. Additionally, being able to collaborate with other organizations to provide food support, housing support, and things like that. Going into social and emotional needs, really thinking about what it takes for students to have the type of support within the campus environment that they may need, and really focusing on even the professional development of the faculty and the staff and the administrators that may be supporting students within these programs or within the campus as a whole. Thinking about trauma-informed practices and care to really understand how to best work with students. Focusing on the 5 grounding principles of trauma-informed care: safety, choice, collaboration, trustworthiness, and empowerment. And being able to really think about what taking those grounding principles and being able to operationalize them within a framework for educators to really reduce the likelihood of re-traumatizing students within our current policies and practices. As one step, but then really taking it a step further and thinking about healing-centered practices. So it's great to be aware of potential traumas and what might kind of re-trigger or reactivate some of those traumas, but really how do we then turn that into a space of a true empowerment, and being able to ground the work not in deficits, but really in self affirmation and empowerment for the students and their individuals, knowing that the students that we're working with are not fully and solely the result of maybe potentially a really terrible day in their lives, right? They're a full person that brings a lot of strength and value within our spaces. And so how do we promote and support that as well? Collaboration with local child welfare agencies, thinking, again, Sebrena mentioned earlier that there is a challenge often with knowing who our foster youth are within our institutions, and sometimes that data isn't shared in a way that is able to best support the students within our institutions. And so what type of MOUs might be able to be set up, or agreements when it comes to data sharing, to be able to share information that's super prevalent to being able to best support the student, to create these support teams through the guided pathways initiatives, for examples that may include child welfare agencies and external partners, to truly be able to support the holistic needs of students, as well as to be able to provide additional resources that the campuses don't kind of operationalize on a day-to-day basis, but instead, in order to kind of leverage what that additional support may look like, both inside and outside of the institution. And then finally, being able to collaborate with other community partners to really think about what that access and retention looks like. So whether it's with foster care guardians, with local programs such as any Casey Foundation, there's a number of different organizations that might be able to provide additional support, again, that aren't necessarily kind of in the wheelhouse of the higher education institutions or child welfare agencies, but still provide some value in necessary support. So things like access to childcare, housing assistance, things like that, these community partners, their community-based organizations might be able to best take the lead on, and having really intentional partnerships with these organizations to best support our foster care alumni on campus. And so those are kind of the recommendations that we put together, again, kind of in this very like holistic view of what it would take to provide an ecosystem of supports for students, as it comes to thinking about Promise as this larger initiative focused on access and completion in this debt-free kind of environment, to really taking it one step further to think about the whole student and what it would mean to be able to support their full success. And so with that being said, we wanted to just kind of talk about what some next steps are regarding College Promise and kind of this work that we've been doing, along with the other 4 groups that focused on different populations of support this year. And so College Promise and EPS will be publishing the reports that we've mentioned really soon, within the next few months or so. And so those will be public and available on the College Promise website, which I'll drop a link in the chat in a moment. And they'll also be shared widely with researchers, with policymakers, and within groups such as the NRC, FAHE, in order to really think about what this looks like from a practitioner standpoint as well. College Promise does an annual convening, often referred to as Promise Net. It's where leaders working within, thank you, Sebrena, the College Promise website was just dropped in the chat. But Promise Net is where different leaders within the K-12 post-secondary education, including existing Promise programs, folks within city or municipal capacities might come in to learn a little bit more about what this looks like, to be able to localize a Promise program. Philanthropy, research, policymakers, all types of folks are invited to attend and engage. This year it is in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So it's as of right now, kind of a live meeting in early November. I just added in the website if you want to copy and paste that in order to attend. You're more than welcome to. I do believe that it's free, but don't quote me on that. And so, you know, just to be able to have thought partners kind of come together and talk about Promise, the evolution of Promise programs, throughout the country is always a really great opportunity to spark that innovation and share those best practices. So I'll turn it over to Sebrena to close us out.
Thanks again. I know we have just a few minutes and we want to make sure we have some time for question and answer, but we always want to come back to the group that matters most when it comes to this work, and that's the students and populations that we're serving and supporting. And so we want to just conclude with a familiar student that we've used before in these kinds of conversations. Ebony, a graduate here in Alabama from a BSW program, MSW program, just expressing what it meant to her to enroll in college and to graduate from college, and just what it meant to, again, what college meant in terms of freedom from her past experiences, that trauma that Lauren talked about, but also the opportunity to choose the kind of future that she wanted. So again, just a reminder to us of why all of us do this work, to remember this group and to support this population. So thank you for taking the time to listen in. We hope you have questions or comments. And if we don't get to them all here, you're welcome to send us an email or reach out to us as well, but we appreciate your time. And with that, we'll open it up for questions or comments.
Great, thank you so much, Lauren, Sebrena, and Angelique. So if any questions that any of you have, please go ahead and type those into the chat and I'll read those out. And there was a question that came in earlier that said, do you have thoughts on if some of the COVID emergency changes will stay or how that might influence the next few years of legislation?
Yeah, I can tell you that the advocacy community is strongly advocating for at least a 1-year extension, just because so many states have struggled to implement that in a timely way, and there is fear that there'll be a lot of unspent dollars. We have not heard about new dollars allocated, rather that 1-year extension is a no-cost extension to give more time for states to roll that out. However, the advocacy community is really closely following the impact of that additional spending in hopes that we can collect data to support a permanent extension of that idea. But right now, I think what is likely to happen is a 1-year no-cost extension with the hope that we can gather enough data to support something more permanent after that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So another question is, do any webinar attendees, so I guess other than the presenters, have examples of ways they've improved financing in their communities? So I guess that wouldn't be to the presenters, but to if anybody else wants to. Right now I have where you can't unmute yourself, but if anyone would like to speak with our presenters about things that you've done in your community, just do a request to unmute and I can unmute you.
And while folks are typing their responses, I appreciate that Lauren had put one of our briefs that we put together as a result of this College Promise partnership that discusses the impact of COVID, especially the impact of COVID on college going foster care youth. We have a second, another brief that's up on the College Promise website that looks at the intersection between being a foster youth and a parent and the impact of college going for that subpopulation of our foster youth. And we are absolutely interested in other folks' stories that they can bring to bear that would help enlighten our policymakers in terms of making these types of decisions to support financing of our programs.
So another question is, let's see, sorry, I'm trying to scroll through. As someone newer to the field, what are ways that somebody might start getting involved in this work?
Well, we mentioned the 2 national networks. So certainly that's a great natural way for you to meet with other people, learn from other programs that might be further along than you are. So again, if you are a researcher interested in connecting, the NRC FAHI is a great group for you to join. We have, monthly webinars that our wonderful colleague Amy spearheads, and then we also have quarterly newsletters where we describe different programs throughout the country. We give you policy updates to understand when you can engage in the policy opportunities. And then when Sebrena did her presentation, she talked about FAN, and actually the FAN leader is on the call right now. If Maddie is able to unmute and tell folks how they can participate in those meetings.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Yeah, if you want to reach, well, you can reach out to Sebrena. She knows how to get in contact with me, or reach out to myself directly, and we can connect you. FAN meets monthly, and we're giving everybody a breather with the start of school. But starting in October, we'll be meeting I believe the first Monday of every month. So happy to get connected. You can also, I'll drop the link to our website in the chat. Thanks so much, everybody.
We haven't had any other questions come in. So any final thoughts or presenters?
I know I have one more concluding thought. I always have things to say. So Sebrena and Lauren, feel free to shut me down anytime. But just wanted to give a shout out for the College Promise meeting coming up virtually in November. You don't have to travel to Kalamazoo. You can log right in virtually for that. There's an opportunity for a virtual login for that meeting. The more champions we have for foster youth, I think the better, because this phenomenon is growing, but there's still a lot to learn. So the more foster champion voices, I think the better. So I would encourage you all to really be engaged in that conversation. And then again, if you're a researcher and you haven't registered on the NRC FAHI website, please do so. Also Maddie just put her information email in for FAN. So there's lots of opportunities for y'all to connect in whatever level you want to be involved. There's lots of opportunity. So we're just encouraging you to participate.
Mm-hmm. And I think the only other thing I'd like to add is if you're not in the research space and you're a practitioner, is to take up space. When there's conversations that are taking place around campus, around various initiatives, or how we're supporting different students, always ask, and how will this impact our foster youth, right? And then continue to ask that question. Be someone who takes up space and is someone at the table who can ask those questions when our students are not present. And so the more and more that we can continue to take up that space with the intention of best supporting our students, I think the more we might see some changes take place on campus, especially some of those that we kind of mentioned before in a very practical sense. That's really about changing policies and practices within our institutions that we made up at some point. It means that we can change it. And so just continue to take up that space and do that good work.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much, Lauren, Sebrena, and Angelique for your presentation. Just a reminder to our audience, we'll be posting today's recording and PowerPoint on the website in the very near future. And we hope to see you at a future webinar. Thanks, everyone. Bye.